what we've discussed too was kind of backed up by the research. Yeah. So we won't bore you with too much research and psychological science, but it is a huge component to our season for all things authentic. And I think it's just nice to know that like some of the things that go on, there's things to back it up. So, so for the research, I mean, I will start off quickly. When we were researching like where this term even comes from, the meaning of it, you know, obviously it's a term that's been over like 300 years ago, this term was coined, but really it had this association with like a homesickness, right? So it was more like a negative connotation, more of a term filled with like pain. So now a lot of the research has tried to like shift this more to like this positive connotation, positive associations. And so a lot of what we'll discuss, we'll kind of discuss that aspect to it of like the positive feelings that this could create. But for you, what do you think stood out in some of the research and just what you know about psychology?
Yeah, I think that I also appreciate like his history, because I do think history affects our psychology. And so learning that the word initially was more of like homesickness and then it sort of transformed. So this an updated definition back to 1975 is that contracts homesickness is the idea that nostalgia refers to yearning for one's past. And it's a positively toned evocation of a lived present. And I really liked lived present, lived past.
Okay.
Yeah. So something that you've done in the past, but it's almost like it feels like I'm living it in the moment and it feels good to me. And so I appreciated just what we've talked about. Some of the data and the science really just lined up with that. I like the same study because it showed that participants associate words like warm, old times, childhood, and also yearning more frequently with nostalgia than they do homesickness. And that's, I think, a lot of what we were feeling. It really describes, like when we're thinking about, what's that show? What we just talked about? Sister Act. I felt warm when I'm thinking about the baseball game with my dad. It went back to his childhood and back to my childhood. And it just reminded me of like old times. And that's exactly what research talks about.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of brings up that phrase a lot of us use. I know more so our parents would use it, and we used to think like, oh, they're so old saying that, talking about the good old times back in my day. And now I'm like, oh, that's me now, where I'm like, those were the good old days, where I'm like, okay, I must be getting a little old, but that's okay, wiser. But even that's kind of within the research too, of like this longing for the good old times. And that one's important to kind of reflect on too, because I mean, a lot of psychological research also shows that like our actual memories of the past aren't accurate more times than not, right? There's only so much we can like recollect, and a lot of our memories are actually flawed. And so when you think about the good old times, sometimes you have to reflect on like, am I even thinking about accurate things in the past, right? Like, were the good old times actually better than times now? Maybe, maybe not, but there's probably something special about that time that makes you reflect on like, oh, the good old times, right? So some of the research says for more on the negative end, like if there are people who are constantly reflecting on like the good old times in the past, it leads you to think that like, okay, there's something that you're not happy with in this present moment, right? So what are you unhappy with? First thing that comes to mind for me is this music discussion. A lot of people, I know I say it sometimes now too, of like, ooh, back in the day, the 90s, R&B, the 2000s music. But it's like, okay, what does that correlate to? Really, it's maybe just a dislike, but not really a dislike. I still like today's music, but it's just like a dissatisfaction with maybe how some music is now compared to like our music that we had growing up, right? Yeah. So it just speaks more to that of like, oh, things that we wish were still different in this present moment.
And there's a study or some studies that actually back that up, that like the music of our youth is actually the best music to us. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So there's a study back from, let me think about 2022, and it looked at The idea that music evokes emotional reactions and nostalgia is prevalent in those emotional reactions. But also it cited 2 other studies from 93, 89, and also 99. So all of these studies are saying similar things, that when they asked participants to rate popular songs, they consistently rated songs that were like the best or most popular, the ones that were during like their late teenage years or their youth or early adulthood. So, I mean, when we say that music was better back in the day, back in our day, it was, but then same for the next generation, they'll probably be saying the same thing because our parents said this.
Yeah, definitely a generational thing, right? Yeah. But yeah, a lot of the research does show that special and most like impressionable time and like young adulthood. Childhood, so maybe thinking about something like your childhood nostalgic, but we're in a huge developmental phase in that like late adolescent, young adulthood type phase, and that's when a lot of these things do stick to us, right?
Yeah, and if we think about it, if we go like the Erickson model, that is that identity formation stage, and so maybe a part of that is that we're developing our sense of self and who we are in that critical period, and so when it comes to things like music, for example, and our musical preferences, they tend to be around that time because we're figuring those things out at that time and they form like a really important impression on us.
Yeah, definitely. Started speaking about this earlier too, especially when we were discussing the Sister Act too, but the connection, right? And so a lot of the research continues to express the importance of the connection, and obviously why that's important for us as humans. But now you think about this aspect of nostalgia and how it can connect us. And since it does connect us with people close to us, maybe even strangers that you saw sharing the video, that's why it makes us feel so good too. All right. So speaking of the connection, I do want to let me cite the right psychologist. So I know Christine Batcho, she's a psychologist, and she discussed how nostalgia is a highly social emotion, right? And then there are some psychologists from the University of Southern California who also did some study around nostalgia. And this brought to their attention that when individuals are with family and friends, right, again, that connection, that's where I resonate with too, or when they were eating, that's when they felt that high level of nostalgia versus when they were at work or school, which... I mean, that's easy to predict, I would think. So, but I mean, it kind of begs, not that we always feel nostalgic, but even that, the aspect that we work together, right? But I think there's still something that like connects us and is social. And so that's like nostalgic to us, which hopefully helps our work not be too bad too. But most people aren't feeling nostalgia in like work settings, school settings, more so connected to others, right? And that resonates with me. That's all the memories I shared of like sitting around the table, eating, family sharing their memories and stuff, us just laughing. And those have been like the best moments for me, at least the most memorable when I think about nostalgia.
Yeah, that study makes a lot of sense. And I like the idea of like highlighting the connection. And also, I think food and eating together also is culturally significant for many people. And so breaking bread might also be, like a context or a conduit for being able to like reflect on those times like back in the day.
Yeah.
The last study that an additional study that I wanted to note when we were talking about like the positive aspects of nostalgia is that it increased in 2021. This study it noted that nostalgia increased positive affect, self-esteem, social connectedness. So that's what we're talking about. Also meaning in life, as well as less boredom.
Okay.
More conversation, which makes sense because you're like talking about what happened, laughing and joking. And also just the ability to maintain intimacy with people. So to be able to maintain that deep connection with another person.
I think that in itself can really answer this question of like, why is nostalgia good for us? Like all of those positive reasons why. And most importantly, this connection, right?
Yeah.
Like if you think about this world we're living in, this society, we're in such a disconnected society right now. Social media connects us in a lot of ways, but completely disconnects us too. And so how amazing it is that something like nostalgia can serve as that like connection piece for individuals. Right?
And when I think about like a particular like a particular group of individuals who this might actually benefit from this, it's something called reminiscence therapy. It's kind of like enjoyable recollections of past events in the therapeutic setting. And I really appreciated the study and wanted to highlight it because it was a study about quality of life in elderly people with Alzheimer's disease. And it found that this type of therapy was helpful in supporting their cognition, reducing depression, and improving aspects of their quality of life. And I found that to be like really important. And so when I think about, special people in my life and also like older folks in my life, and they tell a lot of stories. And particularly my dad, he tells stories and he feels like it feels like it helps him. And it feels like I also benefit from hearing his stories. And we laugh about the stories that he tells me over and over again, and his childhood friends and X, Y, and Z. And so it was cool to kind of see some of that research pan out in terms of types of therapy or processing that people can do related to like the idea of nostalgia or reminiscing about past events and things like that.
Yeah. And during that life phase, right, like so much is changing for individuals, and such an important population, even within the mental health field too. But for those reasons why, right, like that population has a lot of like disconnect and a lot of loneliness. And so how amazing it can be for them to like connect with people, even if it's younger generation, and share stories and share memories. So yeah, I like that. And I think the biggest piece of this, with I think a lot of this research, and I think even a reflection about this topic, there's a motivation piece to nostalgia, right? And so it motivates you to maybe want to shift some things. Unfortunately, we can't go back to the good old days, if they even were as good as we think. But we can't go back to the good old days. But rather than staying stuck in that, sometimes that can be that negative side of nostalgia, right? Of like we're staying stuck in the past. We're very much longing for that. We're very much dissatisfied. But instead using it to motivate of like, okay, I maybe can't get that fullness back of the past, but what am I needing in my present right now to bring some aspects of that? So for me, since reunions are like so important, I've kind of reflected more on that as we've been discussing this of like, right, the cast members getting back together and sitting around with the family and discussing. I even think back to me and some of my college friends. Some of my best friends now will discuss like, dang, things were so easy then. Like now a lot of them are still in Texas. I'm in California. To be in a dorm together, I just have to go down the elevator to go see them. Like nothing beats that. Like we used to complain about like, oh, we got practice and stuff. But in reality, we're like, dang, take us back to dorm life where we just had to like go to class for a little, go to practice. But we could just be in the dorms, like hanging out with each other all day, right? Like take us back to those days. So, but instead of saying stuck in that of like, oh, the good old days, it's motivating of like, okay, obviously reunions are important to me. Like gathering, fellowship is important to me. So how do I want to implement that in my day-to-day life, right? At least in this present moment. So that's kind of what nostalgia can do for us too, right? Really motivate us to bring some important things into our present moments.
I love that. I love the idea of being able to look back to move forward and be able to pull elements that feel really good to you, to appreciate, to look back. One of the definitions that we talked about initially was affection for the past. So to look back with affection and positive sentiments, and also take elements that are relevant to present day and add those in there to broaden your life and to make you more joyful.
Yeah, no, definitely. And hopefully you all can find that motivation for any nostalgia that you feel. Again, not turning it into this like maladaptive thing or unhealthy where you're just sitting in a lot of these like past experiences, past memories for too long. there is some research that says like staying in the past too long obviously takes us away from the present. And so that can be the risk of engaging in too much nostalgia. But for the most part, a lot of the research shows that there's so many benefits to it. And again, it still motivates you to bring something else into the present, maybe as a reminder for yourself. So, but I like a lot of what the research was saying. Really, it's kind of what we've already discussed. So it was nice to know that, like, okay, there is something to back this up.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks for tapping in to All Things Authentic. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. For full episodes, find All Things Authentic on your favorite podcast listening platform.